the fall of 1966, the small town of Ridgewood, Ohio looked like something straight out of a postcard. Tree-lined streets stretched quietly through neat rows of modest homes, and every evening the warm glow of porch lights flickered on as the sun dipped behind the hills. It was the kind of place where everyone greeted each other by name at the grocery store, where children rode their bikes freely through the neighborhood, and where the sound of crickets filled the air after dark. Crime was something people in Ridgewood only heard about on the radio when it happened somewhere far away. For the families living there, it felt like the safest place in the world. Among those families were the Harpers, who had lived in Ridgewood for nearly a decade. Daniel Harper, a curious and protective 14-year-old, often looked after his little sister Lily, who was just 9 years old. The two were inseparable. Neighbors often saw them walking together after school, laughing about something only siblings would understand. Daniel had a quiet confidence about him, the kind that made adults trust him easily, while Lily had a bright smile that seemed to light up every room she entered. To the people of Ridgewood, they were just two normal kids growing up in a peaceful town. On the evening of October 14, 1966, the Harper household was following its usual routine. Dinner had just ended, and the air outside carried the crisp chill of early autumn. Lily asked her mother if she could walk to the corner convenience store to buy her favorite candy bar. It was only 3 blocks away, a short walk along Maple Street and across a small intersection where the town's old street lamp flickered every night. Their mother hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed, asking Daniel to go with her. It wasn't unusual. Daniel had made that short trip countless times before. Around 6 p.m., the siblings stepped out of their front door together. Witnesses later remembered seeing them walking down the sidewalk, Daniel kicking a small pebble along the pavement while Lily skipped ahead, humming softly to herself. The sky was already beginning to fade into shades of orange and purple as the sun slowly sank behind the rooftops. A few neighbors waved to them as they passed, never imagining it would be the last time anyone in Ridgewood would see the Harper children walking down that street. Nearly an hour later, when the children hadn't returned home, their mother felt the first spark of worry. The store owner was called, but he gave an answer that sent a chill through the Harper household. He said Daniel and Lily had never arrived at the store at all. That short 3-block walk, one the children had taken so many times before, had somehow become a path where the two simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions that no one in Ridgewood could answer. By the next morning, the quiet streets of Ridgewood no longer felt peaceful. Police cars lined Maple Street, their red and blue lights flashing against the windows of nearby houses. Officers moved quickly from door to door, knocking on every house along the route Daniel and Lily were believed to have taken. Parents held their children a little closer that day, watching nervously from their porches as investigators searched yards, alleys, and nearby fields. What had started as a family's growing worry had now turned into a town-wide emergency. Search teams were organized within hours. Volunteers from all over Ridgewood gathered near the Harper home, carrying flashlights, lanterns, and even hunting dogs to help comb through the surrounding woods. The area behind the neighborhood stretched into miles of dense forest and old farmland, places where a person could easily become lost after dark. Groups walked shoulder to shoulder through tall grass and fallen leaves, calling out the children's names into the cold autumn air. But every time someone shouted Daniel or Lily, the woods answered only with silence. Within a few days, the case grew serious enough to attract attention from outside agencies. Detectives from nearby counties arrived, and soon even FBI agents joined the investigation. Maps of Ridgewood were spread across tables inside the local police station as investigators carefully retraced the siblings' possible path. They questioned store owners, bus drivers, factory workers, and anyone who might have been near Maple Street that evening. Every possible scenario was considered: an abduction, a runaway situation, even the possibility of a tragic accident somewhere along the route. Rumors quickly began to spread among the townspeople. Some believed a stranger passing through town had taken the children. Others whispered that someone inside Ridgewood might be responsible. A few residents reported suspicious vehicles they claimed to have seen driving slowly through the neighborhood that night, but none of the descriptions matched. Police followed every tip they received, chasing leads across neighboring towns and highways, yet each one eventually led to a dead end. Weeks slowly turned into months. The search parties became smaller, the patrols less frequent, and the once crowded bulletin boards filled with missing posters began to fade under sun and rain. Investigators still kept the case open, but without evidence, witnesses, or even a single solid clue. The disappearance of Daniel and Lily Harper remained one of the most baffling mysteries Ridgewood had ever faced. More than 5 decades passed, and the story of the missing Harper siblings slowly faded into the background of Ridgewood's history. New families moved into the neighborhood, businesses opened and closed, and many of the people who had once searched the woods for Daniel and Lily had either grown old or moved away. For younger residents, the case was little more than a strange local legend occasionally mentioned in old newspaper articles. Yet one building in the center of town still stood quietly, holding secrets that no one had touched for years. The Ridgewood Steelworkers Union Hall had once been one of the busiest places in town. During the 1960s and 70s, it served as the gathering spot for factory workers who spent long days inside the massive steel plant just outside town. Meetings were held there late into the night, voices echoing through the halls as workers argued about wages, safety conditions, and contracts. But when the steel plant shut down in the early 1980s, the building slowly lost its purpose. Within a few years it was abandoned, left to collect dust as time quietly took its toll. By 2019, the old Union Hall had become little more than a forgotten structure. Its windows were cracked, the paint had peeled away from the wooden walls, and weeds had begun growing through the concrete steps outside. When a local developer finally purchased the property with plans to renovate it into office space, a small construction crew was sent inside to begin clearing out decades of debris. As they stepped into the dark interior for the first time, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of rust and old paper hung in the silence. Down in the basement, workers started removing broken furniture and empty filing cabinets that had been left behind years earlier. While tearing down a damaged section of wall paneling, one of the workers noticed something unusual hidden behind the boards. A small metal cabinet had been built directly into the wall itself, almost completely concealed from view. It was coated in grime and sealed shut with a simple but sturdy lock that had clearly not been opened in decades. Curiosity quickly spread among the crew as they forced the cabinet open. Inside were several old reel-to-reel audio tapes, neatly stacked in a cardboard box. Each tape had a handwritten label with dates from the late 1960s. Most appeared to be recordings of union meetings, the kind that might have been made to keep track of official discussions. But as the workers carefully lifted one of the tapes closer to the light, a particular label caught their attention, a date written in faded ink that seemed oddly familiar to anyone who remembered Ridgewood's darkest mystery. The construction crew didn't think much about the tapes at first. To them, they were just another piece of forgotten history from a building that had been abandoned for decades. But something about the dates on the labels made them curious. Instead of throwing them away with the rest of the old paperwork, the workers decided to turn the box over to the Ridgewood Historical Society, a small local group that preserved records and artifacts from the town's past. None of them realized that the fragile reels inside that dusty box might hold the key to a mystery that had haunted Ridgewood for more than 50 years. The Historical Society carefully examined the tapes and noticed that several were marked with dates from October 1966. One tape in particular immediately stood out. Written across its label in fading black ink were the words, October 17, 1966, do not erase. The date alone was enough to send a ripple of unease through the room. It was only 3 days after Daniel and Lily Harper had disappeared. No one knew exactly what the recording contained, but the warning written on the label suggested it had once been important enough for someone to protect. Because the tapes were so old, they couldn't simply be played on modern equipment. A local audio technician was brought in to restore them, carefully cleaning the reels and transferring the recordings to digital format so they wouldn't be damaged further. The process took several days. When the restoration was finally complete, a small group gathered in a quiet office to listen. As the technician pressed play, the room filled with the low crackle of aged magnetic tape before distant voices slowly began to emerge. At first, the conversation sounded ordinary. Several men were gathered around a table, their voices echoing slightly in what was clearly a large room, most likely the Union Hall itself. They talked about factory schedules, worker disputes, and problems with management at the steel plant. The tone of the meeting seemed casual, almost routine. But as the recording continued, something in the atmosphere began to change. The voices grew quieter, more cautious, as if the men were discussing something they didn't want others to hear. Then one voice spoke a sentence that immediately made everyone in the room freeze. The man sounded nervous, almost panicked as he said, "We didn't mean for the kids to see it." For a moment, the tape captured nothing but silence. Then another voice quickly interrupted, speaking in a sharp whisper. "Keep your voice down. If anyone finds out what happened that night, we're all finished." The words hung heavily in the air, turning what had once seemed like an ordinary recording into something far darker than anyone had expected. The moment investigators heard the disturbing conversation on the tape, the Ridgewood Police Department realized the case they had once closed as unsolved might finally have a real lead. The discovery quickly spread through law enforcement circles, and within days the decades-old disappearance of Daniel and Lily Harper was officially reopened. Detectives who had only read about the case in old files were now listening to the same chilling recording again and again, carefully studying every word and every background sound. What had once been a cold case buried in dusty archives was suddenly active again, and the town of Ridgewood found itself facing a mystery it thought had long been forgotten. Audio specialists were brought in to enhance the recording. The tape was fragile, and many of the voices were distorted by time, but modern technology made it possible to isolate certain sounds and patterns in the speech. Investigators slowly began identifying individual speakers based on union records, meeting attendance logs, and employment documents from the steel factory. Most of the voices seemed to belong to men who had worked at the plant in the mid-1960s, many of whom had attended private union meetings inside the hall late at night. Some of those men had passed away decades earlier, leaving behind only faded employment files and brief mentions in old town records. But as investigators continued analyzing the recording, one voice stood out more clearly than the others. The man had spoken several times during the conversation, and his voice carried a calm authority that suggested he had been leading the discussion. By comparing old union documents, detectives discovered that the voice likely belonged to Franklin Dorsey, a young union organizer who had worked closely with factory leadership during the 1960s. Back then, Dorsey had been known as a confident and ambitious figure among the steelworkers. Now, more than 50 years later, he was living quietly in a retirement community several states away. Detectives traveled to speak with him, unsure whether he would even remember the events recorded on the tape. At 82 years old, Franklin Dorsey appeared frail but alert when they arrived at his small apartment. At first, he greeted the investigators politely but cautiously, insisting he had nothing to do with the disappearance of the Harper children. For several minutes, he calmly repeated that he barely remembered anything about the old union meetings from that time. But the tone of the conversation shifted the moment the detectives placed a small recorder on the table and played the restored audio clip. As the crackling sound of the tape filled the room and the voices from that night echoed once again, Franklin's expression slowly began to change. His eyes fixed on the recorder, and the color drained from his face. His hands, resting on the table only moments before, started trembling slightly. The confident denial he had shown earlier faded into a long, uneasy silence. It was the kind of silence that made the investigators realize they were finally standing face to face with someone who knew far more about the night Daniel and Lily disappeared than he had ever admitted before. After several long minutes of silence, Franklin Dorsey finally began to speak. His voice was quiet and strained, as though the memories he was about to describe had been locked away for most of his life. He explained that back in 1966, the steel plant outside Ridgewood had been dealing with serious problems involving chemical waste produced during manufacturing. Proper disposal was expensive and heavily regulated, and some of the men working at the plant had quietly decided to avoid those costs by dumping the waste in a remote wooded area outside town. Only a small group of trusted union members knew about it, and they had sworn never to let the secret reach the public. According to Franklin, the dumping usually happened late at night when the roads were empty and no one was watching. Old trucks carried sealed barrels of industrial chemicals down a narrow dirt path that cut through the woods behind the factory property. The men believed the location was hidden enough that no one would ever discover what they were doing. For months, everything went exactly as planned. The barrels were buried, the trucks disappeared before sunrise, and the secret remained safely contained among the few men involved. But on the evening of October 14, 1966, something unexpected happened. As the men unloaded several barrels under the dim glow of a truck's headlights, one of them suddenly noticed movement near the edge of the trees. At first they assumed it might be a stray animal wandering through the brush. But when the headlights shifted slightly, two small figures became visible standing just beyond the clearing. It was Daniel and Lily Harper, watching quietly from the shadows after accidentally wandering off the nearby path. Franklin said the moment felt like time had completely frozen. The children had clearly seen the trucks, the barrels, and the men gathered around the dumping site. Daniel appeared protective, stepping slightly in front of his younger sister while staring at the group. The workers immediately realized the danger of the situation. If the children returned home and told anyone what they had seen, the illegal dumping operation could be exposed, and everyone involved could face serious charges. Panic spread among the men as they argued about what to do. In the confusion, One of the workers suggested stopping the children before they could run back toward town. The idea, Franklin claimed, was never meant to harm them, only to scare them into staying quiet about what they had witnessed. But fear and poor judgment quickly took control of the situation. The men approached the children, voices raised, trying to prevent them from leaving the clearing. What had started as a desperate attempt to protect a secret was already spiraling into something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. As Franklin continued his confession, the room remained completely silent. Investigators listened carefully, documenting every detail as he described what happened after the children were discovered in the woods. According to him, the men were overwhelmed by panic and fear. They believed that if Daniel and Lily made it back to town and told anyone what they had seen, the illegal dumping operation would be exposed within hours. The steel plant could face massive fines, the union members involved could lose their jobs, and criminal charges might follow. In their desperation, the group made a decision that would haunt Ridgewood for decades. Franklin admitted that the men stopped the children before they could leave the clearing. Daniel reportedly tried to protect his younger sister, refusing to explain why they were there and demanding that the men let them go. But the workers, already terrified of being exposed, were no longer thinking clearly. What began as an attempt to intimidate the children quickly turned chaotic. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and the situation spun completely out of control in the darkness of the forest. Franklin's voice reportedly grew weaker as he described the moment everything changed. During the confrontation, one of the workers pushed Daniel in an attempt to stop him from running. The boy fell hard onto the rough ground near a pile of rocks. Lily screamed, and the men immediately realized the terrible mistake that had just happened. Panic spread through the group as they realized the situation had crossed a line that could never be undone. Fear took over completely, and instead of calling for help, the men focused only on protecting themselves and their secret. For years, the exact details of what followed had remained buried in the memories of the men who were present that night. But Franklin eventually revealed that the group decided to hide what had happened rather than face the consequences. They carried the children deeper into the wooded area, far from the dirt road where the trucks had been parked. Under the cover of darkness, they buried the evidence of that night, convincing themselves that the secret would disappear with time. More than 50 years later, Franklin finally led investigators to the exact location he had described. The area had changed dramatically since 1966. Trees had grown thicker, fallen branches covered the ground, and the dirt path used by the trucks had almost completely vanished. But after hours of careful searching and excavation, investigators discovered something beneath the soil that confirmed the truth Franklin had been hiding for decades. The discovery brought the long-lost mystery of Daniel and Lily Harper closer to being solved than anyone in Ridgewood had ever believed possible. After more than 50 years of silence, the truth about Daniel and Lily Harper finally came to light. A forgotten box of tapes, hidden in the shadows of an abandoned building, had exposed a secret no one dared speak of. The town of Ridgewood, once peaceful and quiet, now carried the weight of a dark history that had been buried beneath time and fear. For the Harper family, the discovery brought closure that had been painfully delayed, yet it also reopened wounds that could never fully heal. The voices on those old tapes reminded everyone that even in the quietest towns, darkness can linger, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And as the sun set over Ridgewood that evening, casting long shadows over streets that had once seemed safe, one thought remained clear. Some secrets refuse to stay buried forever, and some truths are darker than anyone could imagine.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.